Weather disasters test the strength of individuals and communities. The stories of resilience and heroism that emerge are truly remarkable. Whether it's first responders, volunteers, or everyday people stepping up in a crisis, these narratives remind us of the power of preparedness and human determination. Welcome to Weather Heroes.
When Hurricane Katrina tore through the Mississippi Gulf Coast on August 29, 2005, Gulfport Police Sergeant Andy Ratcliffe found himself at the heart of one of America's most devastating natural disasters. A native Mississippian with an infectious enthusiasm for life, he helped maintain order and lead rescue efforts in the storm's immediate aftermath. As a military pilot, he also took to the skies, flying FEMA and other officials over the wreckage and delivering life-saving supplies by helicopter to stranded survivors. In this episode, Colonel Ratcliffe reflects on the chaos and courage of those days. Neighborhoods erased overnight, airports operating without controllers, and military-style drop sites becoming lifelines for desperate families. He shares vivid first-hand accounts of the destruction, the resilience of Gulfport's community spirit, and the rally points that kept responders united when everything else was falling apart. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Weather Heroes. As we continue with our Katrina Chronicles series, we're lucky enough today to be speaking with Colonel Ratcliffe. The Colonel was stationed in Gulfport in 2005, and I believe he was there before then. We're going to hear a little bit about his personal history. He continues to be stationed there and has some unique observations from not only that time and the immediacy of some of the needs and some of the challenges, but looking back upon that and what might we do different and really how has the community changed and maybe even grown. So welcome, Colonel.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for having me here today. I appreciate the honor.
Yes, sir. So, Colonel, if you could give me a little of your personal history, like when did you get to Gulfport? What were your assignments from a military aspect? Any personal observations you had of moving there and just your thoughts in general?
Okay, absolutely. So my name is Andy Ratcliffe. I am humbled and blessed to be a colonel in the United States Army of the Mississippi Army National Guard. Honestly, Kevin, I never thought that I would see the day that I would ever get to the rank I'm at today, but I'm truly blessed and honored. I'm from Natchez, Mississippi. I'm actually a seventh generation Mississippian, family born and raised. Moved to the Gulf Coast about 25 years ago when I graduated Army Flight School in March of 2000. At the time, I'd recently completed the police academy, the police corps academy at Camp Jumping, Mississippi. That was to me fulfilling a lifelong goal of ever since I was a little child, when I was about 10 or 12 or so, young boy. I wanted to do two things in life. I wanted to be a police officer and I wanted to fly helicopters. Because at the time, Kevin, I really thought helicopters were safer than airplanes. And little did I know, but that was a myth. And that was explained to me later on when I went to flight school. But yeah, in March of 2000, graduated Army Flight School, moved to the Gulfport, started working as a police officer for Gulfport Police Department. And when Katrina happened, like we just talked about a minute ago, we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary. And it's like a lot of reflection went into remembering the build up to Katrina and then the aftermath. And everybody's got a Katrina story. Mine's a little bit different than others.
Okay.
And so again, I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of give you my viewpoint on things. But if memory serves correctly, my second child had been born.
Mhm.
And I believe that was June 23rd. I can't mess this date up. June 23rd, 2005, my daughter was born, my first daughter, second child. And we had actually just had my son, who was 2 years older than her. He just turned 2. Pardon, let me do just a little quick math. He was not quite 2 because his birthday is August 26th. And we had his birthday party at our house the Saturday before Katrina. And so, yeah, Katrina was the 29th. So anyway, but August 26th, he turned 2.
Sure.
We finished up his birthday party on that Saturday, and I remember looking at the weather. We knew that there was a storm brewing in the coast, out there in the Gulf. But at the time, it was not forecast to come to Gulfport, and we just were like, okay, ops normal. We're driving on. Well, Sunday morning, we get up to get ready to go to church, and I took a look at the weather, and I told my wife, I said, "Baby, we're not going to church." I was like, "We've got to pack up and we've got to get out of here because the storm is taking a turn to the north, and it's coming right at us." And so that led to a variety of preparations, boarding up the windows. We had just finished building a play set in my backyard for my son to enjoy. I had to disassemble that play set, which took 2 days to put together. but only a couple hours to take apart. And I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I took it apart because one of my neighbors did not. And it ended up being a mangled mess
Mm.
post storm. So that led to, like I said, a variety of just preparations, getting things battened down the hatches. We had pets and whatnot, and we loaded everything up. And we actually went to Wiggins in Stone County, which is one county north of Harrison County. And we spent that weekend with my wife's grandmother and her parents on their old family farm. And that's where we rode the storm at. And of course, we had a generator with us and plenty of fuel, plenty of food. So we were good. And a little tie in there is because I was currently on board with the Gulfport Police Department. I had actually been working on orders for the National Guard doing water bucket support at Camp Shelby. So I was on a leave of absence from the police department. So when the storm happened, I think that was, we watched it. I remember watching trees fall from
Mhm.
inside the house. There's pecan trees, which do not have a very deep root system at all, just falling all over the place. Fortunately, no tree fell on our house. When I say the house, my wife's grandmother's house that we were staying at. And then post landfall, there was no communication. Phones were out. Cell phones did not work. The road that we were on, Highway 15, which is a north-south thoroughfare from the coast, goes all the way up through Wiggins and continues up in the northern part of Mississippi. It was impassable. There's trees all over the place. You couldn't get through. So it took about a day for road crews to come through and actually saw the trees in half to where we could make the road passable. Because I was a company commander at the time. I left that part out. I was a company commander of Alpha Company, 1st to 185th Aviation Assault Helicopter Battalion, and we were based out of Jackson, Mississippi. I knew that through planning, that, hey, if there's an emergency such as this, a natural disaster, get to the closest airport that you can, and just kind of, everybody kind of knew just to rally.
Yeah.
Because again, we couldn't communicate. This was kind of like a pre-laid, set in place plan. And so I made my way to Gulfport International Airport to the where I'm currently serving as the commander of the Mississippi AVCRAD. I made my way to the AVCRAD as a young captain and started linking up with everybody. And then next thing you know, just it kind of evolved from there, Kevin. It was wild. I remember borrowing a helicopter from the AVCRAD, and me and Chief Warrant Officer 4 Dave, I forget Dave's last name. It'll come to me later. We took off and we actually flew FEMA around doing a damage assessment of the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
And it was eye-opening because me, as a police officer here for 5 years at that time, I knew the streets of Gulfport like the back of my hand. I knew all the north. I knew all the landmarks. I knew everything. It was gone, and I did not recognize where I was from the air. It was extremely difficult. There were a couple of big landmarks, like the hospital was still here, the Beau Rivage Casino was here, the Mississippi Coast Coliseum that's in Biloxi, it was here, but almost everything in between was just gone. And it was like, wow. And that was just a direct result of the storm surge that nobody predicted would be as strong or as high as it was.
Right.
And of course, that storm surge led to a lot of flooding inland with all the bayous and the lakes and stuff, just that influx of water, which led to a lot of flooding all throughout Gulfport, all throughout Harrison County. And oh, by the way, what we didn't really know at the time was Hancock County, Pearlington was devastated as well. To our west, that's from Hancock County, to our east in Jackson County, the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast was just devastated with the storm surge. And the only houses on the beach that were actually left standing by and far were the ones that were elevated, which were very few at the time. To our west in Pass Christian, there's several houses of historic nature. They were okay because they were up so far above mean sea level. And so they were okay. But by and far, it was just wild devastation. I mean, the trees, they look like matches, were just it was gone, and houses destroyed. It was surreal. I will put it that way. If I had to describe the aftermath of post landfall of Katrina, it was surreal. So I remember flying FEMA around, doing some damage assessments, landing at some emergency management agencies throughout the Gulf Coast and the different counties, laying the FEMA, because FEMA was on the ground. I mean, I know FEMA got a bad rap post landfall. Mistakes were made, I guess, whatever. But I mean, they were on the ground. Yeah. And we were flying them around as part of the National Guard.
From what I've seen from multiple disasters is it's really hard when even if you're down there ahead of time, getting things with no cell phones, things organized, even if you've pre-deployed, that takes a while to get going.
It did. Yeah. And so the entire operation, though, looking back, was a great example of men and women through all walks of life coming together, united for a single purpose. Okay. And so the outreach from our bordering states, and as far north as New York State, the National Guard came out in force.
Wow.
And I remember reading later that General Blum, Stephen Blum, who was the chief of the National Guard Bureau at the time, he told the governor, he's like, "Hey, whatever you need, the Guard's here for y'all." And keeping in mind too, I mean, Louisiana obviously devastated with New Orleans and the flooding, but I think it's an unreported fact or often glossed over fact that the storm made landfall in Pearlington, Mississippi, and it's just the aftermath just destroyed everything in between. But the entire operation evolved very, very quickly. I mean, just the National Guard activated in force. We had engineering battalions from the state that came down here, the entire aviation force from Mississippi all the way up to Tupelo, Meridian, and Jackson. Everything we kind of centralized here in Gulfport at the airport on the east side, which is all of the military assets, where the AVCRAD is now. And just for reference, AVCRAD is an acronym, AVCRAD. It stands for Aviation Classification Repair Activity Depot.
Okay.
And our mission is to support the Southeast United States with depot level aviation maintenance for the helicopters.
Sure.
So we're one of four in the world, primarily for the Army National Guard, although we do a little bit of work with other branches as well. This was the staging area. There was no power. There was no water.
Right.
We were in the AVCRAD is actually, for reference, co-located with a CRTC. It's a Combat Readiness Training Center that's run by the Air National Guard. Well, the Air National Guard, they opened up their base to us, but again, no running water, no electricity. In the rooms that they offered us to be used, the carpet was wet, just mold was sitting in. So basically, we just kind of set up tents and we set up cots, and the Army did what the Army does. We slept on the ground. We slept in cots. We slept in tents. I myself slept under a Humvee for about 2 weeks post landfall. Very limited as far as resources, but more and more units started getting activated, and eventually this plan just developed, and supplies were coming in daily. And the entire ramp, I still remember looking out, the entire military ramp was full of airplanes coming in delivering supplies, pallets and pallets of supplies. We had C-130s delivering supplies. We had C-5s delivering supplies. I remember a CH-53 coming in and bringing water blivets and fuel blivets. And very quickly, we had a lot of rotary wing traffic on the ramp out front. Meanwhile, you had soldiers living in an open bay hangar. You had them all over. You had tents popping up. I mean, this entire base was like a tent city.
Oh, yeah.
With generators and communications getting back online. And it turned into, initially, from an aviation standpoint, we were doing like a reconnaissance type mission, right? So we had OH-58 Kiowas that came down from Tupelo. We have Apaches in Tupelo, but that's an attack helicopter. We didn't really have a need for an Apache, but we had the Scout helicopters, and we had Blackhawks from Jackson, and we had Chinooks from Meridian. Not to mention all of the other. Are you familiar with EMACs? EMACs are an emergency management agreement with other National Guard states.
Yeah.
And that's where states coordinate ahead of time. They say, hey, Mississippi, you need some help. We in Louisiana, if we can afford to, or Florida, you name it, we'll come to your aid.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a mutually beneficial agreement.
Right.
And so we had all these aircraft here in Gulfport. We also had a lot of aircraft staged out of Camp Shelby, which is about 55 miles to our north. Camp Shelby is one of the largest National Guard training bases in the world. A great location for a staging.
As all those supplies are coming in, I'm assuming that FEMA's gathering resources to try to get them moved out to wherever they can get them moved out to, or MEMA, all the other different types of emergency management organizations. You guys are trying to coordinate all these National Guard folks coming in, but is someone in charge of all that coordination?
It is. So we had our aviation battalion and our brigade activated, and they came down. They set up an emergency operations center from the aviation standpoint. But then our 66 Troop Command and other elements from Joint Force Headquarters, they came down. They set up an actual emergency operations center. Of course, aviation, we were just a small slice. Aviation is an enabler force for the rest of the military and for the ground force commander. But initially, it was an aviation response as far as post-disaster for resupply, because the roads, keep in mind, the roads were impassable. You had crews out there from the power companies. They're trying to get power restored back. You had engineer assets from the Mississippi Army National Guard. They were clearing roads and debris, sand, you name it. All that was going on, and I didn't have any, insight as to what the other response was initially, because I was so focused on the aviation response. And again, I was a young captain. Absolutely. And so I was a young captain as a company commander and gathering my forces up and just kind of basically putting together a response plan without any guidance other than we knew that we had supplies and we
Right.
knew we had aircraft and we had fuel. So let's get those supplies into the hands of the public that needs it the
Nice.
most. And so the way I recall it was that we would essentially give the crews, hey, go out, just do some scouting, do some reconnaissance. If somebody weighs you down, find a place to land, go make contact with them, find out what they need, their immediate needs, and then come back to us and we'll load you down with some supplies and you can go back out and deliver them via air because again, all the roads were impassable to our knowledge at the time. And so that led to basically the development using a 1/50,000 map, developing landing zones throughout the lower three counties. And to a certain degree, later it expanded up north, but
Right.
in the lower three counties of Harrison, Hancock, and Jackson, setting up established LZs or landing zones
Yep.
that we could use as resupply points.
Wow.
And so the crews would just come back and they would give us a grid coordinate. We had a little small enclosed trailer with an air conditioner in it and a radio. And that's what we used to talk to the aircraft because the
that's
Gulfport,
nice. Yeah.
the Gulfport Tower, the airport was shut down.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there was no civil traffic coming in and out. It was all military,
Yeah.
and we were all operating on one radio frequency, a common traffic frequency, a CTAF. And basically, it's the pilot's responsibility to fly to see and avoid.
Right.
And so we deconflicted ourselves. And I don't know of any single aviation mishap that actually happened.
Yeah.
And we operated anywhere from 50 to 120 aircraft a day doing resupply missions for about 2 weeks. And it was a great example of teamwork, people coming together from different units, different states, and working together for a unified response, which was to help out the citizens of the coast.
You said something very interesting because you're talking about the lack of communication, lack of power, but really just not being able to navigate through the areas and y'all creating, maybe it's probably even using an existing military tactic, but creating these landing zones to shepherd supplies out there to central points to help people. That was great.
Absolutely. And an example of these landing zones were like high school football stadiums.
Okay.
They have a big, huge fields, plenty big to land a Chinook on.
Sure.
And of course, at the same time, the local responders, I think we got information that they were actually out there as well.
Right.
But it just evolved so well to where the supplies that were coming in again on a daily basis, they were coming in more than we could push them out.
Yeah.
I mean, and with the emergency operations center on board, we actually started getting formal requests about like, hey, this landing zone, this area needs insulin. They need medical oxygen bottles. They need pharmaceuticals. They need medical supplies. In addition to the MREs that we had in the cases of bottled water, other places eventually we started getting ice. We started delivering ice. It was the wild, wild west for about 2 weeks, and we were operating with sat phones because we had no landlines. Cell phones slowly came back online because we have a civil support team in Mississippi. It's the 47th Civil Support Team, and their task was like CBRN, chemical, biological, biological, nuclear response. But they had a mobile repeater that they brought down, and so when that happened, cell phones started working again. I remember Air Force One coming in. And this is a great example. I believe this is George W. Bush and his father, H.W. He actually came and visited later, which we got to fly him around and see some of the post aftermath about a month or so afterwards. But Air Force One landed here at the Combat Readiness Training Center. And the beautiful thing about it was normally when a presidential plane comes in, they will shut down all aviation traffic, throw up a TFR, temporary flying restriction, and no civil or military aviation can operate near that plane. They said, keep flying, just don't overfly Air Force One. And so he did not impact nor negatively impact operations. We still made the response work.
Yeah.
And it was pretty incredible. It was, again, all hands on deck, and people just they pulled together. And again, I'm speaking just from my stance and my foxhole. There's so much that I found out later about the response that I'm like, it blew my mind. It just totally blew my mind. But it was pretty much a significant emotional event for a lot of people.
So how about your house?
So you remember I said everybody's got a story. Well, my story is a very gentle story. I will say this. My house at the time was about 8 miles off the beach. Got very little damage whatsoever. I think my fence blew over. I lost a shingle on my roof, and a stop sign damaged my garage door. But I mean, it's hardly even worth mentioning because I have friends and people who lost everything with 12 feet of water in their house. One of my fellow pilots, he had just closed on a house in Pass Christian, his homeowner's insurance hadn't even kicked in yet,
Oh,
and he lost everything with
yeah.
12 feet of water. Other people have their stories. I'm sure you've talked to some where they were in the attic or they're out hanging on to limbs, riding the storm out. And a lot of people, I mean, I don't know what the final death count was, but a lot of people lost their lives after
Oh, yeah.
Katrina or during Katrina.
That water was just, yeah, I know everyone looks back at Camille in 69 and says, oh, that was the benchmark. Now we've got
Hmm.
a new one.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife's grandfather and grandmother at the time, they had ridden out Hurricane Camille.
Okay.
And then it was what's 1969.
Yes.
So that was the benchmark. And they're like, oh, Katrina, no
Yeah.
big deal. We're gonna ride this out too. And they did, and they came
Yeah.
through it okay, but they
Yeah.
were rethinking their decision process and then post storm, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me tell you, the predictions have gotten better. You said that, for example, I think a lot of people fell into that same boat where it's Sunday and all of a sudden it's a different tune. A lot of people
That's
are
right.
all of a sudden throwing together a plan. Now, as you're looking at the pre-planning and you've kind of talked about some of the initial response things that struck you back then, and I'm glad we did this or had this ready, or I'm glad that
Mhm.
we didn't do that, or things that you thought, well, really, even if it's by accident, worked out well that to be continued today.
A moment ago, I was telling you about the enclosed trailer with the air conditioner and the radio. So we
Yeah,
took the radio from the flight operations into AFCRAD, took it
sure.
outside, put in that trailer. Of course, radios produce heat, hence you got to have an AC. But that's where you had a guy inside that
Right.
was kind of like talking to the aircraft. And so I was sitting outside with a table and a map, and we finally had a little pop-up tent, and then eventually that led to a battalion, aviation battalion coming down with larger tents. We set
Yeah,
up an
yeah.
actual, a response cell
Right,
that
right.
was out of the shade a little bit. But then all of that led into, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this.
Sure.
I won't say that there wasn't a game plan because at the time I don't know if there was a game plan or not. There probably was
Yeah.
some type of plan, but we were all kind of like just reacting, and we did it very well. But what that led to, Kevin, was the implementation of what they call a HUREX or a hurricane exercise in 2006. And for every year since then, they have a hurricane exercise, which is
Right.
actually kind of morphed into an all hazards severe weather plan exercise because we know there's tornadoes,
Mm,
there's water crises, there's other natural disasters that happen aside from hurricanes. And so,
right.
but every year, the entire National Guard, both on the Army and the air, we use the lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina and we implement those into this exercise every year. And it
Right.
goes back to number one, having a plan,
Hmm.
communication, having
Right.
a plan to communicate without cell phones, right?
Right.
Without
Right.
landlines. So you have pre-established rally points. And so
Yeah.
once everybody understands that plan,
Yeah.
then it makes things a lot easier.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The old Boy Scout motto, be prepared. And another thing that comes to
Yes,
mind is what did Mike Tyson say? Everyone's got a plan until you get hit in the face.
that's right. That's
But
right.
but
Yes.
if you like you talk about those plans they'll do every year, that really is key. Having talked to a lot of emergency planners throughout the nation and interviewed them,
Mhm.
they're saying, yeah, we have that plan. And to your point, they have parts that might be just tornado, but really it's an all-encompassing plan that they practice every year with different scenarios.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and as far as I know, each state has a DOMOPS or domestic operations cell. I know in Mississippi we have a domestic operations cell, and they have a JOC or Joint Operations Center that's manned 24/7. And
Right.
so they are the ones that are the primary proponents behind this all hazards plan and the
Okay.
response. And then they do an extremely good job. I know I'm just going to speak for Mississippi and Colonel Jeremy
Sure.
Parker
Right.
and his team in Jackson. They do an extremely good job coordinating with the emergency management centers from every county in Mississippi, and having meetings on a regular basis and the interaction with local law enforcement. Because one of the challenges back then was the radio communication. Military radios could not talk to civilian law enforcement.
Mm.
And that's somewhat of a challenge. It's been overcome for the
Right.
most part.
Right.
But I mean, when you talk on different bands and having interoperability between law enforcement,
Oh yeah.
civilian first responders, FEMA, MEMA,
Oh
all
yeah.
those things, but DOMOPS does an extremely good job of making that coordination.
That's
And when we
key.
have meetings now, those players, those stakeholders from these different agencies are there.
Right.
And
Right.
that goes back to building relationships, knowing who's who in the zoo. And
Right.
so when you can, and you have these pre-established response measures
Right.
that in the event that you lose power, you lose water, you lose all these other resources, you can still implement the plan.
As you look back and reflect, are there any particularly, I guess, stories that come to mind that kind of help tell the story of Katrina in your head, maybe two or three that whatever they might be about that really could help people understand the devastation or the challenges and the long days and the long nights. And there's no air conditioning, there's no water. Everything is limited. He said no cell phone. How do you get the job done type stuff?
It's difficult for me to tell stories if I wasn't there.
Sure,
So I
sure.
can't really speak to that. I mean, I just know from talking to some of my employees here, some of
Right,
my soldiers, they went through a lot of challenges during the storm and post storm because they didn't have a plan.
right,
And so my encouragement to anyone listening to this, don't just pay lip service and say, "Oh, let's have a hurricane party and we'll be fine." No, you need to have a plan,
yeah,
and your family needs to understand what this plan is. You need to have extra supplies on hand at your house, whether that be in food, batteries, flashlights, a mobile radio that maybe works off of solar or battery powered so you can listen to the weather. And so another recommendation is always keep your car or your vehicle fueled up 100% of the time. If it gets below half a tank, you need to go fill it up because one of the things I remember was the challenges of getting fuel for
right,
vehicles post Katrina. Power at the stations, the ones that did have generators, they were accepting cash only. So that's another little nugget of information that maybe people need to start keeping some emergency cash on hand.
yeah,
And don't wait until the last minute when you say, "Oh, there's a storm coming," because what happens at all the big box stores? All
right.
the generators are going to be gone. All the batteries are going to be gone. So all those supplies that you're waiting until the last minute to get,
Mm,
they're probably not going to be there.
yeah,
And then having extra fuel cans on hand. And so if you're paying attention to the weather
mm,
a couple of weeks out in advance, there's a tropical storm brewing. Like right now, Hurricane Aaron is out on the Atlantic right now, but we've known about it for a while. And
yeah,
so I hope that those people on the East Coast are preparing
right,
for the eventual possible landfall for that.
right,
But
right.
it goes back to you don't just gloss over it. You have to have a plan in place. You have to have supplies on hand.
Yeah.
And then you need to communicate that plan with your family and
Mhm,
have a place to evacuate. And I would also offer up, don't wait too late to evacuate.
mhm,
Evacuate early because the roads are going to get congested. And it
right,
goes back to if you don't have fuel in your car and you're stuck in traffic for hours and hours, your car runs out of gas, you can't get gas. What are you going to do?
right.
So you have to imagine like worst case scenario of what could be and take these Katrina stories or every disaster story and learn from the people who were there.
I've talked to some of the fire folks, police folks, now talking to you, and everyone thinks, well, everyone's going to come and rescue me, but people need to be prepared that they might have to be on their own for
Yes,
days, and that's another thing people have got to be thinking about. I mean, just hearing the stories you've told and they've told to me.
that's right. That's one of the common misconceptions that people think someone from the government or some government agency is going to come save me.
Yeah,
No, you are in charge of your own safety and well-being initially, and you have to take ownership of that as an American,
right.
as a citizen of this great country that we are so blessed to live
Yeah,
in. But it's on you.
yeah,
Now, those other things from the government agencies and the National Guard, we're a resource. We're going to come when we can, but keeping in mind that those first responders, they have families that they have to take care of as well. So all the ambulance drivers and the EMTs, paramedics, the firemen, the police officers out there, members of the National Guard, we have to take care of our families first, so then we can come take care of you.
as you look back and you look through at, I guess, the Gulfport and really the coast today, what do you say are the changes? Obviously, Gulfport has recovered and is thriving. A lot of the coastal areas are thriving post Katrina, but I know a lot of work went into that. Any observations around that?
So looking back, it did do a horrible devastation to the entire Gulf coastline. There are certain areas of the Gulf Coast that to date have never fully recovered.
Right.
I would say that in Gulfport and Biloxi, Pascagoula, Bay St. Louis, we've all done a very good job. Pascagoula, the entire coastline have done a pretty good job of revitalization. Right, it brought growth. A lot of, or I would say, I don't know the exact number, but millions of dollars were brought in to rebuild, and a lot of folks chose to rebuild back their houses along Highway 90. Some folks chose not to. It did cause a change in the zoning as far as flood zones, as far as the elevation of what houses have to be built at a certain height now if they're going to be close to the water like that. From a business standpoint, economic standpoint, I think the Gulf Coast of Mississippi And just speaking for Gulfport alone, because that's where I'm a resident of, it's been very positive as far as we continue to grow. We're doing very well. So yeah, it's come back very well. But going back to those days, I mean, it was just to clear the debris and to rebuild. But that took a lot of strong leadership from at the local level,
Right.
throughout the Gulf Coast, the state level, and to a certain degree, the national level, offered their assistance as well.
Right.
And I would just like to say again, thank you to all the men and women who were part of the response to Mississippi for Hurricane Katrina, because I can't remember their names, but I remember I've got some of their patches on my desk from New York and, as far north as Ohio. I mean, everybody came out, and the National Guard came out to support the National Guard and to support the men and women of the Gulf Coast. And we were very, very appreciative of that.
Yeah, it seemed from all the stories that I hear and what I saw at the time, and I've seen these last 20 years, the coastal residents, the citizens of Mississippi have really pulled together to recover the entire state, especially the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like you said, there's so many people
Yep.
across the United States from all walks of life who came there and have really helped push it back into recovery as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really, really so.
Absolutely. The North Carolina Men's Baptist Association came down in force. We had so many civic relief organizations. The Red Cross was involved. So many people gave up their time and their money to leave their jobs back home and come to the Mississippi Gulf Coast to assist with the disaster recovery. And so I would like to offer our appreciation for that as well.
Is there anything that you'd like to say about your Katrina experience and maybe the experience in general of Katrina along the coast to the National Guard? Any aspect of that, something I haven't asked you that you'd like to share?
Well, I think I would just offer up that the experiences, those of us who lived through Katrina and the response, helped give us the experience and the wisdom, if you will, necessary to be ready for the next response. I mean, at the end of the day, we were professional soldiers and airmen, and we are here to do our duty. It goes back to less than 1% of the United States population serve in uniform, and it's truly a calling. But at the same time, I think we all do it out of a sense of patriotism to join our country's fighting force, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, you name it, the Air Force, the Space Force now. It's truly a calling. But I think going back to just our experiences helped, and I know it helped mold me as a leader.
Sure.
It gave me the wisdom, I think, to know how to make better decisions in the future about preparedness, about what to expect when you were in a worst case scenario. And then as we continue to train our young airmen and our soldiers in our formations now, some of these soldiers in my formation, they were not old enough. I mean, I've got 18-year-olds. They weren't alive during Katrina, right? And speaking of disasters, I mean, a lot of my soldiers were not alive during 9/11.
About to say that's a big.
And so they don't have a
today.
They don't.
There's that
Right.
understanding.
They don't have a non-story.
Yeah.
That's right. So one of my jobs, my mantras, is trying to impart some of that knowledge and experience within my senior leaders in my formation
Right.
to our younger soldiers to
Right.
prepare them, because we're going to be retired. I mean, I've got a few years left, and then I'm going to hang up the spurs and the uniform and figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But
Mhm.
these young soldiers are going to be in charge, and if they don't have that experience, and that's where we need to continue coaching and mentoring them, because they're the future leaders of America.
Any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave the viewers with?
Well, I just like to offer up thank you to you, Kevin, for doing this. I mean, a lot of people would kind of just made the point they don't have a Hurricane Katrina story because they weren't part of it or they weren't alive. And I think it goes back to remembering what it was like and learning from those experiences. And thank you for doing the Katrina Chronicles. I think that's an amazing thing. It helps document the stories of the men and women who either A, lived through Katrina, or B, helped respond to Katrina in a way to help the Gulf Coast and the Mississippi Gulf Coast rebuild and come back better post-event. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Colonel. I tell you, I found a lot of what I am calling weather heroes in this group. So, along with
Well, I wouldn't. I think it's a stretch to call me a hero. I'm just a humble servant. But I think it's a pretty cool title that you have.
Well, I've also found that to be very true. Everyone's very humble, so I appreciate that. Okay.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, Colonel, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.